So I didn't put up a video last week because I underestimated the amount of time it would take me to build a video from scratch. That means that I had to find a topic to talk about and then properly format how I was going to talk about that topic. And I severely underestimated the amount of time that would take me. And so, since I've been trying to do this on a weekly basis, I missed last week's video. Now, in this video, I'm wanting to talk about a term called white knighting. Now, white knighting is a term that you will likely not find in a dictionary. You might find it in a urban dictionary or something like that, but you won't find it, let's say, in the Oxford English Dictionary. Now, white knighting is, for those who don't know, when a man shows unwarranted kindness to a woman for the sake of gaining some sort of sexual or relational reward from her. So to make that a little bit more clear, it's when a man shows unwarranted kindness. Now, what do I mean by unwarranted kindness? Kindness is such that everyone is due a certain amount of kindness from us. For example, if I have a neighbor, it could be considered kind of me not to blare my music at 1 in the morning so as not to wake him. That could, in some senses, be considered kindness, though it is a warranted kindness, which means that it's expected of me to show that kind of respect for my neighbor. You know, I can't go around blaring music at 1 o'clock in the morning without facing social consequences. So that's called warranted kindness. Now let's say I decided to mow my neighbor's lawn, that would be considered unwarranted kindness in the sense that I don't have to mow his lawn, and if I do, it's something that isn't expected of me. And so that's considered unwarranted kindness. Now, the same is for when a man shows kindness to a woman. There's warranted kindness, that is the respect and dignity that is expected of one human to another human. And then there's unwarranted kindness, which is something that is unexpected. It's in layman's terms, it's going above and beyond. Now let's look at the second half of that statement, which is unwarranted kindness for the second half, the sake of gaining a sexual reward or relational reward. Now what does that mean? It, again, to put it colloquially, we could say for the sake of getting laid. Except I think that we could break that down even further and say that it's maybe a little bit more nuanced than that. However, I'm not going to get into that now, just for the sake of keeping things succinct. Now, this term, white knighting, is actually used as a pejorative term, which is surprising. So, what I've just described, a man showing unwarranted kindness, undue kindness for the sake of, to a woman for the sake of gaining a sexual reward or relational reward, would seem as if it's a thing that a man does as a trick, right? It's a way of getting laid, to put it somewhat crudely. So it would seem that a man would white knight for the sake of getting laid. And in fact, that is what he's being accused of when this term is used pejoratively. So I'm going to, for the sake of simplicity, break men into two broad categories, and keep in mind that a man could fit into neither category. So there's white knights, so the men who white knight, and then there's dark knights, that is, the men who criticize white knighting. Now, why do these dark knights criticize white knights? Like, when the term white knight is used as a pejorative, why is it being used as a pejorative? Well, it's being used as a pejorative because we could say it's being used as a pejorative because, you know, these men are trying to be tricksters or whatever, pretending to be nice in order to get laid. However, that's actually not why it's used as a pejorative. Like, if you knew nothing about white knighting and I told this to you and said, hey, this is a pejorative, you might think, oh, it's because, you know, these men are being these tricksters trying to get laid, you know, trying to manipulate women into sleeping with them, when, in fact, that's not why it's used as a pejorative by these dark knights. It's used as a pejorative because white knighting is looked upon as a sort of weakness. Now, why is it looked upon as a sort of weakness? Is it because men who white knight are very unsuccessful in their attempts to manipulate women? No, actually, that's not why it's considered weakness. I mean, the Dark Knights believe this. The men who criticize white knights believe this, that they're, you know, it's it's a bad way to try to get laid. But that's not actually why they criticize it. They criticize it and use it as a pejorative because they view white knights as weak men. Now, what do we mean by that? And why? Why? That's a better question. Why are men who white knight considered weak by these dark knights, the men who criticize them? Well, it's because the dark knights believe that women are the ones doing the tricking, meaning that women are telling men, in one way or another, that they need to show them undue kindness in order to think more highly of the man. So in order to, let's say, increase one's sexual market value, a man has to be kind and show kindness. Now, there's a group of men who believe that this is a lie. They believe that women are signaling this to men, but they believe and understand that this is a lie. They don't think that the way of increasing one's sexual market value is to show kindness. They believe, excuse me, they believe that women do this in order to gain something out of these men, and then that they will never sleep with them, because women also view these men as weak. Now, let's break that down and look at that for a moment. So we have a group of men who believe that women are going around tricking and manipulating men into doing kind things for them and being kind, decent people. And if that's the case, we would have to say of these men that they don't think very highly of women. Or at least think very highly of the women they believe this about. I mean, how could you, right? If I believed that a person was being manipulative to another person, I think that they're being a bad person. And especially for the sake of stroking their own ego, which is what these men believe, these dark knights believe. Now, if that's the case, it would seem to me that if, let's say, a woman dated a man like that, that she's not going to be respected by that man. I mean, how could this man respect her? If he believes that she's manipulated these other men, he doesn't think she's a good person, and he thinks that, you know, he can't show this unwarranted kindness to her, because if he does, he's falling prey to her manipulation, and thus he's going to be manipulated. The other part of this is that these women then don't respect the men that white knight for them, meaning they've signaled to these men, white knight for me, but I don't actually respect you, thus they don't want to be with them. And so what's interesting is if these women do exist, there's a problem, right? Because when I originally gave the definition of white knighting, I gave it two parts. There was an action and there was a motivation. Now, the action was showing undue kindness, but the important part is that the motivation there is to get some sort of sexual reward or relational reward. Now, that leaves us a question, which is, what if a man shows undue kindness because he's actually a kind person? Meaning he is the kind of person that might go and mow his neighbor's lawn because he's a friendly person. Or what if a man shows undue kindness to a woman because because he adores her? So this would imply that women who actually do signal to these men to white knight for them, again, we've already established that they don't respect these men. How could they? Because they understand that they're tricking these men. And so women who do that are going to have a hard time telling the difference between a man who does it for the sake of some sort of sexual reward or relational reward, and a man who does it because he genuinely admires her, or a man who does it because he's a kind and good person. Again, how do you tell the difference between the two? And so what I would say then is, if a woman who's used to manipulating men, she's used to seeing a certain kind of behavioral pattern out of men who she thinks are doing it for a specific motivation. And since she's used to seeing that, when she sees that behavioral pattern, she automatically will assume that they are doing it because they're weak men. And so it would then come to my attention that women who do that will never find a man that truly adores them, or never be with a man who truly adores them, right? Because how could she? Because a good and decent man, if he shows her undue kindness, she's going to view it as weakness, and thus his sexual market value will decrease in her eyes. And so she's bound to be with men that don't respect her. And I find that very interesting. I find this conclusion very interesting because it's, in a way, reaping what one has sown. And that is about all I have to say.